I wasn't supposed to be home that early. That's the thing. If I'd just stuck to my normal schedule, none of this would have come to light, at least not that day. But fate's funny like that. You get one little unexpected change, and your whole life flips on its head. It was a random Tuesday, mid-afternoon, and I decided to cut out of work early. A couple of meetings got cancelled, and I figured, why not surprise Karen and the kids? Maybe take them out for dinner, something nice to break up the routine. I pulled into the driveway, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the AC. The kids were still at school, and Karen had told me she'd be working from home that day, so I figured she was in her office, head down, typing away like usual. I walked in, my keys jingling, and called out, "Karen?" Nothing. No response. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe she had headphones in. So I kicked off my shoes, tossed my jacket on the couch, and headed towards the back of the house. That's when I noticed something off. The back door, which led to our patio, was slightly open. Karen never left doors open, especially not that one. She was always paranoid about security, always checking locks, making sure the house was sealed up tight before bed. So, for her to leave the door cracked like that? It sent a little chill down my spine, but again, I brushed it off. I was probably just being weird. As I moved closer to the door, I heard it, a soft giggle. Not Karen's usual laugh. It was quieter, more intimate. I froze for a second, straining to hear more. There it was again, followed by a low murmur of voices. I couldn't make out what was being said, but my instincts were on high alert now. I stepped onto the patio, and that's when I saw it. Karen wasn't alone. She was out in the backyard, lounging in one of the deck chairs, sunglasses on, a glass of wine in hand, and next to her was a man. They were close, too close. His hand rested casually on her thigh as they laughed at something I couldn't hear. They hadn't noticed me yet. My mind raced. At first, I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. Maybe it was a work colleague? Maybe it was harmless? But no. The way his fingers traced her skin, the way she leaned into him with that familiar smile, the one she used to give me, there was nothing harmless about it. I stayed frozen, standing in the doorway like an idiot, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. Time seemed to stretch out, every second feeling like an hour. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I couldn't breathe. Finally, the man leaned in, said something that made her laugh again, and then he kissed her. Not a quick peck. No. This was deep, like they'd done it 100 times before. My stomach flipped, bile rising in my throat. That's when they saw me, Karen's eyes locking onto mine, her face draining of color in an instant. Her hand jerked away from him like she'd been burned, but the damage was done. I'd seen it all. The guy, whoever the hell he was, stood up slowly, awkwardly, trying to gauge what was going to happen next. I could see the panic in his eyes, the fear that he was about to get his teeth knocked in. Karen stammered something, but I wasn't listening. I couldn't hear her. All I could focus on was the fact that this betrayal, had been happening right under my nose, in my own goddamn house. It felt like the world had split open beneath me. My whole life, our marriage, our family, was crashing down, and all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as everything burned around me. I didn't say a word. Not at first. It was like my body had disconnected from my brain. My mouth went dry, my legs felt heavy, and for a moment, I considered turning around and just walking out the door. Just pretending like I hadn't seen it. Like I could somehow undo what had just happened. But there's no coming back from seeing your wife kissing another man on your own back porch, not in the home you've built together. Not when you know exactly what that kiss means. I didn't need to ask how long it had been going on. The way she reacted, the look on her face, this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. This wasn't the first time. I took a breath, or at least I tried to. My chest was tight, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out everything else. Karen's lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. The guy, meanwhile, just stood there. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. His face was blank, like he didn't know whether he should apologize or make a run for it. Who the fuck is this? The words came out before I even realized I was speaking. My voice was low, calm. Too calm. Like I was talking to a neighbor who parked in my spot. Karen stood up, quickly, her sunglasses dropping to the ground. She didn't look at me, though. She couldn't. Her hands fidgeted at her sides like she was trying to figure out what to do with them. The guy still hadn't moved. I could feel his eyes on me, trying to size me up, like he was gauging how much trouble he was in. Karen's voice finally came through, but she stopped herself. Whatever excuse she had planned wasn't ready yet. Her face was red, either from the sun or from getting caught, and she kept opening and closing her mouth like she was searching for the right words. You what? I asked, stepping closer, my eyes never leaving her. I wasn't looking at him anymore. I didn't care who he was. This was about her. About the fact that she was the one who promised me forever, who'd worn my ring for the last 10 years, who I'd shared a life with. I can explain, she finally managed, but even she didn't sound convinced. Her voice was shaky, uncertain. She didn't even try to make eye contact with me, which told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. She was just caught. Explain? Explain what? I didn't raise my voice, not yet. But the rage was there, boiling under the surface. My hands were shaking, and I had to shove them into my pockets to keep from doing something I might regret. You think there's a way to explain this? Karen glanced at the guy, and that was it for me. That tiny look, that split-second glance she gave him. She was looking at him like she was waiting for him to help, waiting for him to chime in, to back her up. It was all I needed to see. I wasn't even angry at him anymore. Hell, he didn't know me anything. She was the one who'd betrayed me, the one who was about to try and twist this into something that wasn't her fault. I stared at her, and for a brief moment, I considered walking away. Just turning around and leaving her standing there with her lover, letting them figure out what came next. But I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to hear her say it. I needed to know how long she'd been lying to me. How long? I asked. My voice wasn't calm anymore. There was an edge to it now, and I could see Karen flinch. I had no intention of making this easy for her. It's not what you think, she said finally, her words coming out rushed and panicked. It's not serious, I swear. How long? I cut her off. I wasn't interested in her excuses. She could save them for the marriage counselor we'd never be seeing. A few months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her arms crossed over her chest like she was trying to make herself smaller. I could barely recognize the woman in front of me. She wasn't the Karen I thought I knew. She was a stranger. A few months. I repeated it out loud, like I needed to hear it again to believe it. She didn't deny it. She didn't say anything. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. The guy finally moved, taking a half step back, like he was about to make an exit. Good idea, I thought. Get the hell out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave in one piece. You should go, I said, not even bothering to look at him. My eyes were locked on Karen. I wanted her to feel every bit of the anger and disgust I was feeling. I wanted her to know how badly she'd fucked up. The guy didn't argue. He mumbled something, maybe an apology, maybe not, and then he was gone, slipping out through the side gate like the coward he was. That left just me and her. Karen stayed quiet for a few seconds, long enough for the silence to stretch out between us, long enough for me to start wondering if she even cared. Then she finally looked at me, her eyes wet. Not with guilt, though. I'd known her too long to fall for that. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear that I was going to throw her out, that I was going to tell everyone what she'd done. Fear that I was about to make her pay for this in the worst way possible. Why? I asked, my voice breaking a little. I didn't want it to. I wanted to stay strong, to stay angry, but seeing her like this, seeing her standing there, looking so goddamn pathetic, it made me feel weak. I don't know, she muttered, her voice cracking too. It just happened. I let out a short, bitter laugh. It just happened? That's your excuse? I didn't plan this, she said, her voice rising a bit. She was getting defensive now. It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Like what? I snapped. You didn't mean to get caught? Her silence was all the answer I needed. Why didn't you just leave? I asked, and this time, my voice was calm again, almost too calm. Why didn't you just pack your shit and leave instead of sneaking around like this? She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was no answer. Or maybe there was, but she just didn't want to say it out loud. The truth was, she didn't want to leave because it was easier this way. Easier to have me at home, to keep up the image, to keep the stability, while she did whatever the hell she wanted on the side. I nodded slowly, taking it all in. My whole marriage, everything I thought was real, it was all bullshit. Just a comfortable lie we'd been living in. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned away, staring out into the yard, trying to think of what to do next. Trying to think of how the hell I was going to explain this to the kids. Karen stepped forward, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't. Just don't. I didn't want her near me, not right now. Maybe not ever again. I'm sorry, she whispered. Yeah, I said, shaking my head. Me too. After the guy left, it was just me and Karen, standing on the patio like two people who had no idea what to say to each other. The tension in the air was suffocating. She stood there, her arms crossed, trying to look like she had some kind of defense, like she could explain this away, but we both knew there was nothing she could say that would change what just happened. I stayed quiet for a long time, trying to get control of myself. I wasn't even sure what I wanted from her at this point. An explanation? An apology? Did it even matter anymore? But the silence was heavy, and I could feel her waiting for me to make the first move, waiting for me to decide what came next. You want to tell me how long this has been going on? I finally asked, my voice steady, but there was no mistaking the anger behind it. Or are you going to stick to a few months and hope that's enough? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the ground. It's been a few months, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. It didn't mean anything. I scoffed. Didn't mean anything? You expect me to believe that? It didn't, she said quickly, her words coming out in a rush. I swear, it's just something that happened. I don't even know why, but it doesn't change anything. I love you, I do. I cut her off, laughing bitterly. You love me? You really think that's gonna fly right now? You're standing there, trying to convince me that what I saw doesn't mean anything, and you expect me to believe that you still love me? Karen stepped forward, her hands reaching out toward me like she was trying to calm me down, but I pulled back, shaking my head. Don't, I warned her. Don't even try to touch me right now. Her hands dropped, and she bit her lip, fighting back whatever she wanted to say next. She was scrambling, trying to find a way to salvage this, but we both knew there was nothing left to save. Who is he? I asked, more out of spite than curiosity. Just some random guy? Someone from work? What? He's a friend, she said, her voice so small I could barely hear her. A friend. I nodded, laughing again. Sure, that's what friends do. You bring your friend over, sit on the patio, let him put his hands on you while I'm at work. Must be one hell of a friendship. Please, don't do this, she pleaded, her voice shaky. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I snapped. You're cheating on me. You've been cheating on me for months, and you didn't think I'd find out, did you? You didn't think I'd ever catch you, because you figured you had it all under control. Is that it? I didn't want to hurt you, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want this to happen, I swear. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, feeling my blood pressure rise. Well, guess what, Karen, you did. You blew up our entire fucking life because what? You got bored? You didn't feel like being a wife anymore, so you found someone else to fill that gap? It's not like that, she protested. It's not about you. It's me. I'm the one who screwed up, I know that. I don't know why I did it, but I never wanted to hurt you. You keep saying that like it's supposed to make me feel better, I shot back. Like I'm supposed to be relieved because you didn't mean to hurt me. Well, you did. And now you're standing there, trying to make excuses, trying to act like you're the victim in all this. I'm not acting like the victim, she yelled, her voice finally breaking through. I know I fucked up, okay? I know I ruined everything. But it's not that simple. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, my voice cold. I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you've been sneaking around behind my back, bringing some asshole into our house while I'm out there working, trying to support this family. So, don't tell me I don't understand. You don't, she insisted, her voice rising in frustration. You don't get it. It wasn't like I went out looking for this. It just happened. Stop saying that, I growled, stepping closer. Stop acting like this was some accident. It didn't just happen. You made a choice, Karen. You chose to do this. You chose to throw away everything we had. She didn't respond. She just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I thought she was going to break down completely, that she'd collapse under the weight of it all, but she held herself together, barely. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry. I stared at her, feeling a sickening mix of anger and pity. This wasn't the Karen I knew. The woman I married would never have done this. The woman I loved wouldn't have stood here, offering a half-assed apology while my life fell apart around me. Why him? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Out of all the people, why him? She wiped at her eyes, sniffling. I don't know. I don't even like him that much. It just felt good, I guess. He made me feel wanted. Wanted? I repeated, shaking my head. I made you feel wanted. I gave you everything, Karen. I've been here, through everything, and you're telling me you felt more wanted by some guy you barely even like? It's not like that, she said again, her voice trembling. You don't understand what it's like. You don't know how lonely I've been. I didn't mean to do this, but I was just. I don't know. I needed something. Lonely? I laughed bitterly. You've been lonely? I'm the one who's been working my ass off to keep this family together while you've been out here playing house with someone else. You have no idea what lonely even means. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her voice cracking again. I didn't mean for it to get this far. You keep saying that like it's supposed to change something, I said, stepping closer, my voice low. But it doesn't. You did this. You made this choice. And now, we're here. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, crying softly, looking more pathetic than I'd ever seen her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel the urge to comfort her, to make things right. All I felt was anger. Pure, unfiltered rage at the fact that she had destroyed everything we had built together. I don't know what you expect me to do, I said finally, my voice shaking. You think you can just say you're sorry and that'll be enough? You think we can just go back to the way things were? No, she whispered, shaking her head. I don't expect that. I just don't want to lose you. You already lost me, I said coldly. The moment you decided to cheat, you lost me. Karen's face crumpled, and she collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. I stood there, staring down at her, feeling nothing but disgust. The woman I loved, the woman I'd spent the last 10 years building a life with, was gone. All that was left was a broken shell of the person I thought I knew. And I had no idea what to do next. I walked away. I didn't say another word to her, didn't even bother looking at her as I left the patio and went back into the house. She stayed behind, crying softly into her hands, but I didn't care. I needed space. I needed time to think about what I was going to do next, how I was going to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. Revenge. The word sat heavy in my mind as I paced through the living room, my mind spinning with possibilities. The logical part of me knew that I could just walk away, file for divorce, and never speak to her again. But that wasn't enough. She didn't get to walk away clean. She didn't get to shatter my life and still come out with hers intact. No, I wasn't going to let her get away that easy. I went upstairs, into our bedroom, the room we had shared for years. I stood there, staring at the bed, at her side of the closet, her clothes neatly hung up like everything was still normal. Like she hadn't just admitted to cheating on me for months. That was when I realized just how cold I'd gotten. The anger had simmered down into something else, something more dangerous. I grabbed her phone from the nightstand and scrolled through her contacts. It didn't take long to find his name. I'd already memorized his face, but seeing his name sitting there, saved in her phone like it was nothing, like he was just another friend, it set me off again. My hands were shaking as I clicked on his name, opened the message history. There was no need to dig deep, it was all there. Explicit messages. Plans to meet up, to sneak around. Pictures I didn't need to see but couldn't stop myself from looking at. The bile rose in my throat as I scrolled through months of their exchanges, but I didn't stop. I wanted the full story. I wanted to know just how far this had gone. And I wanted to know exactly what I could use against her. I wasn't just planning to expose her. I was going to destroy her. I forwarded the most damning messages to myself, making sure to leave no trace on her phone. I wasn't stupid, I needed leverage, something to ensure that when the time came, she couldn't play the victim, couldn't twist the story. She was going to regret every single moment she had spent with that asshole, and I was going to make sure of it. Once I had what I needed, I sat down at the desk in the corner of our bedroom. The same desk where we used to sit and plan vacations, talk about our future. It felt sick to be sitting there now, planning how to ruin her, but that's where we were. I opened my laptop and started typing. First step, freeze the bank accounts. We had joint accounts, and I wasn't about to let her keep access to the money I'd earned while she was sneaking around with another man. It took a few minutes to lock everything down, no more joint accounts, no more easy access to our savings. She'd have to come to me if she wanted money now. Next, I reached out to a lawyer. I wasn't wasting any time. This wasn't going to be a long, drawn-out process where she got to play the victim. No, I was going to hit her with the divorce papers as soon as possible, and I was going to make sure I walked away with everything. The house, the kids, the money, I was taking it all. I wasn't about to let her ruin our lives and walk away with anything. While I waited for the lawyer to respond, I started thinking about the next phase. It wasn't enough to just end the marriage. No, I wanted everyone to know what she'd done. She deserved to be humiliated, to be exposed for the liar she was. I pulled out my phone, opened Facebook, and started scrolling through her friends list. It didn't take long to find who I was looking for: her family, her closest friends, the people who thought she was perfect, the people who didn't know the truth. I copied the messages, the pictures, and dropped them into a file. I wasn't going to send it just yet, I needed to be smart about this. Timing was everything. I didn't want her to have a chance to control the narrative, to twist things in her favor. I was going to hit her all at once, make sure she didn't have time to react. As I sat there, plotting, I could hear her moving around downstairs. I imagined her pacing, maybe trying to figure out what she could say to fix this. But there was no fixing it. She could cry all she wanted, beg for forgiveness, but it wouldn't change anything. She had made her choice, and now she was going to live with the consequences. The lawyer called me back, and we went over the basics. She'd get the papers by the end of the week, and we'd start the process. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in negotiating. I wanted full custody of the kids, the house, and I wanted it fast. I didn't care what she had to say about it. The next step was a bit trickier. I didn't just want to humiliate her publicly. I wanted her to feel it at work, too. That guy, her lover, he worked in the same office as her. I figured their little affair had probably been pretty low-key there, but I was going to change that. I called up a friend of mine, someone who knew people in HR at her company. It took a bit of convincing, but eventually, I got what I needed: an inside line on how to make sure the affair came to light in the worst possible way. It was perfect. Karen had built up a good reputation at work, but that was about to come crashing down. Once the rumors started, once people found out what she'd been doing on company time, it would spread like wildfire. Office gossip was relentless, and I knew it would only be a matter of time before her career took a hit. Maybe she wouldn't lose her job, but she'd never be able to walk into that office again without feeling the weight of everyone's judgment. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. After sending a few more emails, lining everything up, I went downstairs. Karen was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up at me as I walked in, her eyes filled with something like hope. Maybe she thought I'd cooled off, that I was ready to talk. Maybe she thought there was still a chance to save this. But there wasn't. "I'm filing for divorce," I said flatly, my voice void of any emotion. "You'll get the papers soon. I'm keeping the house, and I'm keeping the kids. You're going to sign, and you're going to leave. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. Your friends, your family, your job, they'll all know." Her face crumpled, and she started to cry again, but I didn't care. I was past caring. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We have kids, I've already done it," I said coldly. "And if you think you're getting sympathy from me, you're dead wrong. You made your choice, Karen. Now live with it." She didn't say anything after that. Just sat there, staring at the table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. Not after everything she'd done. Not after she'd thrown away everything we had. I left her sitting there and went back upstairs. There was still more work to be done, more strings to pull, but I had time. Karen wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. By the end of the week, though, she'd be gone. And by the time I was finished, she wouldn't have anything left. The house was quiet for the next couple of days. Karen stayed in her lane, trying to avoid me, probably still hoping this was all a bad dream she could wake up from. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. I kept myself busy, finalizing the last steps of my plan. The divorce papers were drawn up, and the lawyer had assured me that Karen would have them by Friday morning. That left one final thing: our last conversation. After that, I was done with her. It was Thursday evening when I decided it was time. The kids were staying over at my brother's place for a couple of days. I told him I needed some space, and he hadn't asked questions. It was better for the kids to be out of the house while everything played out. I found Karen in the kitchen again, sitting at the same table where I told her about the divorce. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and swollen. She'd clearly been crying, but I didn't care. I was beyond caring. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. I placed the divorce papers on the table between us. "These are for you." She stared at the papers, not reaching for them. "You really want to do this?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "You're really just going to end it like this?" "I'm not ending anything," I said, keeping my tone flat. "You ended it the moment you decided to cheat. I'm just finishing what you started." Her lip trembled, and she lowered her gaze to the papers in front of her. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "I made a mistake, but I still love you, Mark." "I do." I shook my head. "No, you don't. You might think you do, but you don't. If you loved me, you wouldn't have been sneaking around behind my back for months. If you loved me, you would have come to me, talked to me about whatever you were feeling instead of turning to someone else." "I didn't want to hurt you," she said softly, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop. "Stop what?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at her. "What exactly were you trying to stop? The affair? The lies? Or were you just hoping I wouldn't find out? She stayed silent, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the papers. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the realization that there was no way to fix this. No way to undo what she had done. She'd had her fun, but now the reality of her choices was hitting her, and there was no turning back. "What do you want me to say?" she asked after a long pause. "What can I say that will make this better?" "Nothing," I said coldly. "There's nothing you can say. The damage is done. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Her breath hitched, and I could tell she was trying to keep herself together. It didn't matter to me. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down, of seeing me falter. I wasn't the one who screwed everything up, she was. "I didn't plan any of this, you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just happened. I got in too deep, and I didn't know how to get out." "You didn't want to get out," I shot back, my voice sharp. "Don't pretend like you were a victim in this, Karen. You could have stopped any time, but you didn't. You didn't because you liked it. You liked the attention, the excitement, whatever the hell it was that he gave you. And now, you're paying the price." She looked away, biting her lip, and I could see the guilt weighing on her. But it wasn't enough. Guilt didn't fix what she'd done. It didn't fix the fact that she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "I know that doesn't mean much, but I am." "Yeah, you're sorry because you got caught," I said bluntly. "If I hadn't come home early that day, you'd still be sneaking around. You'd still be lying to me. So, don't sit there and pretend like you're sorry for anything other than the fact that your little secret is out." Her eyes filled with tears again, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe regret, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to let myself feel sorry for her. Not after everything she'd done. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," I said firmly. "There's no fixing this. The only thing left to do is sign those papers and walk away." She looked down at the papers again, her hands shaking. I could see the internal battle she was fighting. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want to face the reality that this was over, but she knew she had no choice. "And what about the kids?" she asked quietly, not looking up. "What do we tell them?" "We tell them the truth," I said, crossing my arms. "That we're getting divorced. They don't need to know the details, but they'll figure it out soon enough." "They'll hate me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell her that, yes, they probably would hate her once they found out. But the other part of me knew that wasn't entirely fair. They were still young, and I didn't want them to grow up resenting their mother, no matter how much she'd screwed up. "They're going to be hurt," I said after a long pause. "But we'll get through it. They don't need to know everything. We'll keep it civil for their sake." She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. "Do you still hate me?" she asked suddenly, her voice small. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since all of this had started. She looked broken, tired, like she'd aged years in just a few days. There was no more fight left in her, no more excuses. Just a hollow shell of the woman I once knew. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But hate? I don't know if that's the right word." She let out a shaky breath, nodding slowly. "I deserve it. I know I do." "I don't care what you think you deserve," I said flatly. "This isn't about punishment. It's about consequences. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." She didn't say anything after that. She just sat there, staring down at the papers, her fingers trembling as she reached for the pen. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, that she might try to fight it, but after a long pause, she signed her name. And just like that, it was over. She slid the papers back toward me, her eyes wet with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but there was no fight left in her voice. I know, I said quietly, taking the papers and standing up. But it's too late for that. I left the kitchen without another word, the papers in hand. I'd expected to feel some sense of satisfaction, some relief, but all I felt was empty. The house was quiet, and the weight of everything that had happened settled over me like a heavy blanket. There was no going back now. This was the end. The divorce would be finalized in a few months, but in my mind, it was already done. I'd won. I'd taken everything, her dignity, her life as she knew it, and soon enough, the house and kids too. But standing there, alone in the silence, I realized something important. Revenge didn't make me feel any better. It didn't fix the damage. It didn't undo the pain she'd caused me, and it didn't make up for the fact that the life I thought we had was gone. All I had left was the aftermath. And that was something I'd have to live with, long after Karen was out of the picture. It had been a week since Karen signed the divorce papers, and the house felt different. Quiet in a way that wasn't comforting. It was just me and the kids now, though they still didn't know the full story. I hadn't told them why their mother wasn't coming back. I wasn't sure how to tell them. They'd figure it out soon enough, but for now, I let them believe it was just a separation. I watched them play in the backyard that afternoon, their laughter carrying into the house. I sat at the kitchen table, Karen's empty chair across from me. My lawyer called earlier that day to confirm the paperwork had been filed, and I would officially have custody of the house. That was the last piece. The house, the kids, and our accounts, all of it was mine now. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought we had built together, was in my hands. But it didn't feel like a win. Revenge had seemed so satisfying when I'd set it in motion. The idea of stripping Karen of everything, her comfort, her security, her reputation, had fueled me through those first few days. But now that it was done, now that I had what I wanted, I was left with a different feeling. Empty. Like I had just walked away from a car crash with only the wreckage to deal with. Karen had moved out the day after she signed the papers. She didn't say much as she packed her things. I didn't stop her, didn't try to make things harder than they needed to be. By that point, I'd already sent her friends and family everything, the messages, the pictures. They knew what she'd done. Some of them had reached out to me, offering their sympathies, their support. Others? Well, they chose to side with Karen, buying whatever story she'd sold them to make herself look like less of a monster. The rumors at her work had started spreading too. I heard from a mutual friend that the affair had been a poorly kept secret, but now that I'd exposed it, the whispers had turned into outright condemnation. Her reputation at the office was shattered, just like I'd planned. The guy she'd been seeing? He was fired. Apparently, he was just another casualty of my little operation. I didn't feel bad for him, though. He knew exactly what he was getting into when he laid his hands on my wife. For a moment, I let myself wonder what Karen's life looked like now. She was staying with a friend, from what I'd heard. Probably piecing things back together, trying to salvage whatever she had left. I imagined her sitting in some cramped apartment, crying to herself about how unfair it all was. About how I had ruined her life. But she hadn't called me. She hadn't tried to fight the divorce, hadn't tried to come back to the house. In a way, that was the most surprising part of it all. I thought she'd put up more of a fight, thought she'd try to guilt me into forgiving her, but instead, she just disappeared. Maybe that was her way of accepting responsibility. Or maybe she was just too embarrassed to face me. Either way, it didn't change the fact that I had one. I had everything I wanted, and she was left with nothing. But sitting there at that kitchen table, staring out at the kids playing, it hit me. Winning didn't mean anything. What had I really won? The house? Sure. The kids? Of course. But the life I thought I was fighting to protect? That was gone. I had fought so hard to take back control, to make Karen pay for what she did, but now that it was over, I realized the life we had was never coming back. Even with her out of the picture, the damage had already been done. I heard the front door open and close, followed by footsteps coming down the hall. I looked up to see Karen standing in the doorway, her eyes puffy and red, her face pale. She wasn't supposed to be here. She didn't have any reason to come back, and yet, here she was. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly, her voice shaky. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, that we had nothing left to talk about. But another part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say now? "Fine," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Talk." She stepped into the kitchen, but she didn't sit down. She just stood there, looking like she was about to break down all over again. I waited, watching her, wondering what she could possibly want now that she'd lost everything. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," she began, her voice low. "But I needed to see you. To tell you that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not just because I got caught. Not just because my life is in ruins. But because I realize now what I've done. What I threw away." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what she expected me to say to that. She'd had plenty of time to figure that out before she went and destroyed our marriage. "I know you'll never forgive me," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know that. But I need you to know that I hate myself for what I did. I hate that I hurt you, that I hurt the kids. I wasn't thinking, and now I have to live with that for the rest of my life." There was a long pause, and I could hear the kids laughing outside. The sound was almost painful in its normalcy, a reminder that life was going on, even as everything else fell apart. "I'm leaving town," Karen said finally, her voice barely audible. "I can't stay here. I've lost everything, and there's nothing left for me. I just wanted to say goodbye before I go." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. She was leaving. For good, it sounded like. Part of me wanted to feel relieved, like this was the final nail in the coffin, the closure I needed. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, felt something else. Sadness, maybe. Regret. I wasn't sure. "You don't have to leave," I said, though my voice lacked any real conviction. "You can stay here. Figure things out." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "There's nothing to figure out. You've already won. You have the house, the kids, everything. I can't stay here and watch you move on without me." Her words stung, but I didn't show it. I couldn't let her see how much this was still affecting me. I had to stay strong, for the kids, for myself. "Where are you going?" I asked, more out of politeness than actual interest. "I don't know," she admitted, wiping at her eyes. "Maybe stay with my sister for a while. Try to rebuild my life, if that's even possible." I nodded, though I didn't have much to say to that. This was the end. Not just of our marriage, but of everything we had shared together. The life we'd built, the memories, the future we thought we had, it was all gone now. Karen took a shaky breath, glancing toward the backyard where the kids were still playing. "Tell them I love them, okay? I'll be in touch. When I figure things out." "I will," I said, my voice cold. "But don't expect them to forget what you did." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down again. But she didn't. She just nodded, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The sound of the front door closing told me all I needed to know. I wasn't supposed to be home that early. That's the thing. If I'd just stuck to my normal schedule, none of this would have come to light, at least not that day. But fate's funny like that. You get one little unexpected change, and your whole life flips on its head. It was a random Tuesday, mid-afternoon, and I decided to cut out of work early. A couple of meetings got cancelled, and I figured, why not surprise Karen and the kids? Maybe take them out for dinner, something nice to break up the routine. I pulled into the driveway, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the AC. The kids were still at school, and Karen had told me she'd be working from home that day, so I figured she was in her office, head down, typing away like usual.